Okay, so we're going to solve question 1 from chapter 4 hard questions. So this is a question on last semester's midterm 1 exam. All right, so I'm assuming that you have already downloaded the question, and so you should have this problem in front of you, but I'm just going to read the question out. And then we'll move to the whiteboard, but I'm assuming you already have a download copy of this. So a rapid COVID-19 test in Massachusetts is currently selling for $50 each, and 2,000 units are sold every week. Recently, the wages of lab technicians who process the rapid tests increased. At the same time, the state of Massachusetts required that all high school students take a rapid COVID-19 test every week. These two events will, A, unambiguously increase the equilibrium quantity of rapid COVID-19 tests, but the effect on equilibrium price is ambiguous. B, unambiguously increase both the equilibrium price and quantity of rapid COVID-19 tests. C, affect only the equilibrium price of rapid COVID-19 tests, but have no effect on quantity. D, unambiguously increase the equilibrium price of COVID-19 tests, but the effect on equilibrium quantity is ambiguous. Okay, so let's go to the whiteboard and solve this. So whenever you're solving a question like this, you should always start by drawing a graph. So let's do that. All right, let's label this price. Here we have quantity. Here we have supply curve and a demand curve. Let's label these supply. This is demand. Okay. And we know that the current equilibrium price is 50. And the current quantity is 2,000. Okay. So the first thing that happens is that the wages of lab technicians increase. Right. So that's the first action. Okay, wages increase. Well, we know that when wages increase, right, this increases production costs, right? What do we know about increases in production costs? Well, this, when wages increase, this decreases supply. All right, so how do we show that on this graph? Well, we shift the supply curve, right? Because this is a non-price determinant change in quantity supplied, right? Specifically, we want to be, the firms are going to, at $50, firms are going to want to produce less tests, right? Because wages have increased for essentially each test, right? Because the lab technician that's processing the tests is being paid more. Okay, so at $50, firms do not want to produce at 2,000 anymore. Okay, so to show that, we need to shift the supply curve. All right. So the orange supply curve represents our new supply curve after we reflected the increase in wages. All right. So firms are producing less, right? At every single price. So as you can see, at $50, right, the supply curve is now here, which is definitely lower than 2,000, right? But we're not done yet, right? Because the demand curve is not here. The demand curve is over here. So at this point here, right, consumers are still demanding 2,000, right? But the firms are producing less than 2,000. This is called a shortage, right? There's more demand than there is supply. So how does the market fix that? Well, you increase prices, right? The law of demand says that as prices go up, quantity goes down. The law of supply tells us that as prices go up, quantity goes up, right? Quantity supplied goes up, right? Well, that's what we want here, right? We want at this, in this scenario, we want to incentivize firms to produce more and for consumers to consume less. And eventually they'll meet at some equilibrium point. To do this, the market increases prices, right? And so the new equilibrium is here, higher price, lower quantity. Okay. Well, a second thing happens, right? So this is a second action. So second action is all students are required to take a test every week. So all students required to take tests every week. Okay. What's the result of this? Well, there's more than 2,000 students in the state of Massachusetts, right? So this is going to increase demand. Demand is going to increase. Okay, how do we show that on this graph? We're going to shift the demand curve, right? So let's do that. All right. And so now we've shifted the demand curve, right, over here. And so what essentially happens now is at the price, whatever this price was here, right, something greater than 50, right, there is an increase in demand. Okay, so now at whatever this price is here, you're going to notice that the new, maybe we can just draw a line. Let's mark this point. Roughly close. So as you see, whatever this price is, it's something greater than 50, right? So you'll notice this is what's demanded now at the new demand curve. This is what's demanded at this price, but we're still at this supply curve here, right? So now we have a shortage. We have more demand than there is supply. So how does the market fix this? Same process, right? You increase price. If you increase price, that lowers demand and increases supply by law of demand and law of supply. So what do? We end up here. So after those two economic actions, we end up at some price some new equilibrium price, but it looks like the same equilibrium quantity from before we did any of the economic actions, whether it was a wage increase or an increase in demand. Clearly, we see that prices went up, right? That clearly happened. So answer A says that the two events will unambiguously increase equilibrium quantity. Well, clearly that's not the case, right? We just did this experiment here, and the quantity is the same, close to the same. It's definitely not unambiguously higher. In fact, what if we did this? We see this shift in demand, right? We went from the black curve to the orange curve. What if we did this? We shifted demand, but we just shifted it a little bit. Let's put it down here so we can label it. just a little bit. Right? Where would the equilibrium be now? It wouldn't be here. It would be here. Well, clearly that's a lower equilibrium than 2000 than it was originally. So are we sure that it unambiguously increases quantity? I don't think so, right? Impossible. We just showed that if demand doesn't increase that much, because it doesn't say how much demand increases, right? We didn't specify how much that increase was. We just said that there was an increase, right? I mean, you can say the same thing if we had it increase all the way over here, right? Right now the equilibrium is all the way over here. Well, that's more than 2000. So it can be lower, it can be high. But notice that all three of these outcomes, the price is always higher, right? So we can't say, so answer A says that there's an unambiguous increase in the equilibrium quantity. That's wrong. But the effect on equilibrium price is ambiguous. Well, it's not ambiguous. We know that it always goes up. So A cannot be the correct answer. How about B? Unambiguously increase both equilibrium price and quantity. Well, there is an unambiguous increase in the price. I agree with that. But as we just showed, the change in equilibrium quantity is not ambiguous. Clearly, it's not ambiguous. Okay. C says affect only the equilibrium price of rapid COVID-19 tests, but have no effect on quantity. Well, it's not that it doesn't have an effect on quantity, right? We just showed that here. We can complete this. All right. So these are our three scenarios, right? Big change in demand, middle-ish change in demand, smallish change in demand, right? Here it's greater, here it's the same, roughly the same, and here it's lower. It can change quantity. It's not that it has no effect, it's that we don't know what the effect is. It's an ambiguous effect. It depends on how much demand changes. And the same argument, we can make the same argument with supply. We can adjust how far we shift. We can shift supply more. We can say it's a big reduction in supply, or it's a smaller change in reduction, or a smaller change in supply, right? But either way, the curves are shifting in this direction or in this direction. It's always the price is always increasing. If supply decreases and demand increases, the prices go up, because both of those are actions that make supply or make prices go up. Okay, so that only leaves us with D, right? And D says unambiguously increase the equilibrium price of rapid COVID-19 tests. Yep, I agree with that. But the effect on equilibrium quantity is ambiguous. I agree with that. That's a good answer. So the answer for this question should be D, as we just showed here. Okay, so let me clear this board. And so there's four scenarios, right, for questions like this. So scenario one says that supply increases and demand increases, right? If this happens, well, what do we know? If supply increases, and let's draw a graph again. price, supply. So if supply increases, we know that supply is going to shift in this direction, right? And if demand increases, I'm sorry, supply will shift in this direction, shift down and to the right, and demand will shift in this direction, right? So essentially we'll have demand increasing and supply increasing. Right? So you see both of these actions, right? It doesn't matter the magnitude of the shift. Both of these actions push quantity higher, right? The new equilibrium of the orange supply and demand curves will always meet somewhere to the right of the old equilibrium, right? So quantity always increases. Price is ambiguous. Right? Because depending on the magnitude of the shifts, price could go up or price could go down. Essentially, the new equilibrium point is going to be somewhere in this triangle formed by the black supply and demand curves. It's going to be somewhere over here, right? If it's somewhere up here, prices go up. If it's somewhere down here, prices go down. But quantity is always higher, right? Okay. Scenario 2, supply decreases and demand decreases. What happens here? Well, if supply decreases, right, then we're going somewhere over here, and then demand decreases somewhere over here. And right? So it's the opposite, right? Both decrease, so both move in this direction, right? The new equilibrium is going to always be somewhere to the left of the old old equilibrium, or the ones for the black curves, right? It's going to be somewhere in this triangle. If it's higher, the prices go up. If it's lower, the prices go down. But quantity always decreases, right? And again, just depends on the magnitude of the shift in supply and the shift in demand. But demand is going in this direction, supply is going in this direction under this scenario. Right, so here, quantity always decreases. Price is ambiguous. All right. Scenario 3. Supply decreases, but demand increases. What is this scenario? Well, this is a scenario, so back to the original. Demand increases. That means we use the orange demand curve. And supply decreases, so we're going to use the blue supply curve. right? So supply is going this way, demand is going this way. That means that the new equilibrium is going to be somewhere above the old equilibrium, corresponding to the black supply and demand curves. It's going to be somewhere up here, somewhere contained in this triangle, and I guess all the way up, right? There'll be some boundary issues over here. All right, so this means now under this scenario, scenario 3, price always increases, right? Because it's always, the new equilibrium is always going to be somewhere above the old equilibrium. What we don't know is about quantity. Quantity could be over here, or quantity could be over here. If it's over here, it's decreasing. If it's over here, it's increasing. All right, again, depends on the magnitude of the shift of both curves, right? So in this scenario, price always increases. Quantity is ambiguous. All right, final scenario, supply increases, but demand decreases. And by now you're probably getting the picture, right? So that's going to bring us to this triangle down here, right? Where we're using the blue demand curve, orange supply curve, right? So supply increases, demand decreases. So we end up somewhere down here. So here the price is always going down, but the quantity is ambiguous, right? Because it can be left or right. But we're always somewhere in this triangle, right? Because the demand curve is always shifting down this way, and the demand curve, or the supply curve, I'm sorry, the demand curve is always shifting down this way, and the supply curve is always shifting down this way, right? To reflect the increase and the decrease, right? So price always decreases. Quantity is ambiguous. So I hope that was helpful. Thank you for listening.